far, far back in the deep and forgotten ages of the universe, before the Imperium of Man had ever set its first foundation stone, before the Eldar had begun to weave their paths through the stars, there was a war so terrible, so vast, that it shook the very fabric of the heavens themselves. This was the war in heaven, a battle between gods and kings, fought not with swords or shields, but with the light of stars and the death of entire worlds. The Necron, a race as old as the stars themselves, had once been much like any other, full of life and ambition, though a great bitterness lay deep in their hearts. Their home world circled a dying sun, and the light that reached them was cold and poisonous, making their lives short and full of suffering. And so it was that they gazed up at the stars with envy, for across the heavens other races flourished, and none more so than the Old Ones. Now the Old Ones were ancient even in those days, masters of the immaterium, and it was said that they could shape reality with a mere thought. They lived long and well under bright suns and in rich worlds, while the Necron tier withered in the shadow of their cruel star. This envy turned to resentment, and resentment into hatred, until finally the Necrons set their sights upon the Old Ones. But their bodies, frail and failing, were not enough to wage war against such powerful foes. It was then that the Necron discovered the C'tan, great and terrible beings that lived among the stars themselves, feeding on the light of suns. The C'tan offered the Necron a way to escape their fate, promising them immortality in exchange for their loyalty. And so, with heavy hearts but desperate for relief, the Necron tier accepted. In the blink of a cosmic eye, the C'tan remade them. Gone were their frail bodies, replaced by gleaming forms of living metal. They no longer aged, no longer suffered from disease or death. They had become the Necrons, deathless and eternal. But as is often the way with such bargains, there was a price. The C'tan had not only remade their bodies, they had devoured their souls, leaving the Necrons hollow inside. The Necron, for all their immortality, had lost what made them truly alive. And so the Necrons went to war against the Old Ones, and the galaxy trembled under the weight of their battles. Entire star systems were destroyed, their suns extinguished by the power of the C'tan and the relentless march of the Necron legions. The Old Ones, with their mastery of the warp, fought valiantly, creating new races like the Eldar and the Orcs to serve as their armies. But they could not stem the tide of destruction. For many ages, the war in heaven raged on, until at last, the Old Ones were driven to the brink of extinction. The Necrons and their C'tan masters stood victorious. But victory, as it so often is, was bittersweet, for even as the Old Ones were defeated, Zar, the silent king of the Necrons, began to see the truth of their situation. The C'tan, though they had granted the Necrons immortality, cared nothing for them beyond their use as soldiers. The C'tan were beings of hunger, creatures that consumed the very light of stars, and they had used the Necrons as tools in their cosmic feast. The Necrons, for all their power, were little more than slaves to these star gods, and this Zar could not abide. For a long time Zar pondered, for he was a ruler not known for rash actions or words. He had led the Necron tier into this war, had sought to free his people from their suffering, and now he saw only more chains. And so, in the quiet halls of his palace, he devised a plan, a way to free the Necrons from their terrible masters. With great care, Zar and his most trusted cryptex began to craft devices, tesseract labyrinths they called them, that could trap even the vast energies of the C'tan. And when the time was right, when the C'tan were at their most vulnerable, Zar struck. In a moment that would be remembered throughout the galaxy's long and winding history, the Necrons turned on their masters. One by one, the C'tan were shattered, their immense forms broken into countless shards, each one imprisoned in a tesseract labyrinth, never to feed on the light of stars again. The Necrons had won their freedom, but it came at a terrible cost. For though they had broken the chains of the C'tan, The Necrons were left to drift in a galaxy that had been ravaged by war. The old ones were gone, their empire in ruins, but the Necron dynasties were broken as well. Their legions, once mighty and unstoppable, were now scattered and damaged. Their tomb worlds lying in disrepair were still the younger races. Those created by the old ones to fight in their stead still roamed the galaxy. And though they were no match for the Necrons' technology, the Necrons themselves were too weakened to press their advantage. It was then that Tsar made the decision that would define the fate of his people for the next eons. The Necrons, he knew, could not continue as they were. They needed time. Time to repair their tomb worlds, time to heal the wounds of war, and time to wait for a galaxy that was no longer in turmoil. Tsar called for the Great Sleep, a period of stasis where the Necrons would retreat into their tombs, hidden beneath the surface of countless worlds. There they would sleep for millions of years, waiting in silence for the day when they could rise again. The tomb worlds were prepared, vast underground chambers filled with the cold, gleaming forms of the Necron legions. One by one, the Necrons marched into their stasis crypts, their minds and bodies locked in perfect preservation. And as the last tomb was sealed, the galaxy itself seemed to sigh, for the war had finally ended, and the Necrons were no more. But Tsar, the Silent King, did not join his people in the Great Sleep. Instead, burdened by the weight of his decisions and the fate of his people, he exiled himself. He could not bear to watch over a galaxy that had fallen so far from the greatness he had once dreamed of. And so, Tsar wandered into the cold void of space, disappearing into the dark corners of the universe, leaving behind a galaxy that would soon forget the Necrons, even as they slumbered beneath its surface. The stars turned, as they always had, and the galaxy moved on. The Necrons, hidden beneath the sands of time, slept in silence, their legions waiting patiently for the day when they would awaken once more. For though the galaxy had forgotten them, the Necrons had not forgotten the galaxy, and when the time came, they would rise again, as they always had, to reclaim what had been theirs. And so the Necrons slept across the vast expanse of the galaxy, from the cold fringes where the stars burned dim and faint, to the teeming heart, where suns blazed in furious brightness. The Necron tomb worlds lay still. Their vast chambers, carved deep into the bones of forgotten planets, were filled with silent legions, their metal bodies locked in eternal slumber. The Necrons had entered the Great Sleep, and the galaxy, in its endless turning, moved on without them. For millions of years the Necrons lay hidden beneath the surface of these tomb worlds, forgotten by the stars they had once sought to rule. Above them, the galaxy changed, as it always did. Stars were born and died, flaring into life only to collapse into the cold embrace of the void. Civilizations rose from the dust, built empires that stretched across the stars, and then fell, leaving only ruins behind. But the Necrons, timeless and unchanging, took no part in this great cycle of rise and fall. They waited, patient and still, as they always had. Beneath the ground, the tombs themselves were wonders of ancient design. Great doors of black metal, sealed tight, lay hidden under the shifting sands of desert worlds, or buried beneath the ice of frozen planets. Their entrances were long forgotten, swallowed by the passing ages, until even the memory of the Necrons was lost to time. Deep within, the tombs hummed faintly with the energy of machines far older than any living race could comprehend. They had been built to last for eternity, and though the galaxy above them moved on, the tombs remained untouched, their systems maintaining a perfect stillness. Inside, the Necrons lay in stasis, their forms as cold and still as the metal from which they had been forged. Row upon row of silent warriors stood motionless in their chambers, their green eyes dark, their weapons held loosely in hands that had not moved in millennia. They were not dead, for the Necrons did not die. Their bodies were made of necrodermis, a living metal that could repair itself from almost any wound, and their minds, though dulled by the passage of time, were preserved in the stasis fields that kept them frozen in the moment before awakening. There was no sound in the tomb worlds, no movement, no life. It was a silence deeper than any living thing could comprehend, a silence that stretched across eons. The younger races, those that rose during the Necron's long slumber, would have found such stillness unnerving, for they were creatures of noise and motion, constantly striving, constantly changing. But the Necrons were different. They had long ago shed the concerns of mortality, and in their sleep, they were content to wait. Time, to the Necrons, was meaningless. As the Necrons slept, the galaxy above them continued its slow, relentless dance. The Eldar, those proud and ancient beings shaped by the Old Ones, rose to prominence during the Necrons' long absence. Their civilization, rich in art, knowledge, and psychic power, spread across the stars like a great and glittering web. The Eldar were a race of dreamers, their lives measured not in decades or centuries, but in millennia. They built worlds of beauty and wonder, where every thought, every emotion, was made real by their mastery of the warp. But for all their greatness, the Eldar did not know of the Necrons that slept beneath their feet. To them, the tomb worlds were nothing more than distant and forgotten planets, barren and lifeless. Then came the humans. Unlike the Eldar, whose rise was slow and graceful, humanity's spread across the galaxy was chaotic and furious. They were a younger race, fragile and fleeting, their lives burning bright but short. Yet for all their mortality, the humans were driven by an insatiable desire to conquer, to explore, to push the boundaries of their existence. They built ships that sailed through the warp, their colonies spreading like wildfire across the stars. The Imperium of Man was born in blood and fire, an empire that stretched across countless worlds, but one that was always teetering on the edge of collapse. Even as the humans built their empire, they remained unaware of the Necrons that lay beneath the surface of the worlds they claimed. They dug deep into planets rich in minerals and resources, mined the bones of ancient worlds, and built cities atop the very tombs of the Necron dynasties. And still the Necrons slept. The humans found ruins now and then, strange structures made of black stone or ancient metals that they could not identify. But these were dismissed as relics of forgotten civilizations, long dead and of no consequence. How little they knew. For while the galaxy above them churned and shifted, the Necron tomb worlds remained as they always had. Silent, eternal, waiting. The systems that had been set in place before the Great Sleep still functioned, their machines humming softly as they monitored the conditions of the galaxy above. They waited for the right time, for the moment when the Necrons would rise again and reclaim their place among the stars. And while that time had not yet come, the tombs were prepared. They had been built with a patience that no mortal race could understand, designed to last until the end of time itself if necessary. On some worlds, the surface changed beyond recognition. Deserts became oceans, mountains crumbled into plains, and forests grew where once there had been only rock. In these places, the tomb worlds sank deeper into the ground, their entrances sealed by the weight of millennia. On other planets, where glaciers moved slowly across the landscape, the tombs were buried beneath ice and snow, hidden away in the frozen dark. But no matter how the galaxy shifted, the tombs remained. Inside, the Necron overlords still stood in their grand halls, surrounded by their legions of warriors. They had once been kings and lords, rulers of the Necron, but now they were something more, something eternal. Their minds, unlike those of the lesser Necrons, were still sharp. Though locked in a dreamless stasis, they remembered the days of the Necrontyr Empire, remembered the bitter war against the Old Ones, and the terrible cost of their transformation. And though they had slept for millennia, their thoughts had not dulled. They knew that one day the time would come for them to awaken, to rise once more and claim the galaxy, and so they waited. The younger races continued their wars, their empires grew and fell, and the stars themselves shifted in their courses. But the Necrons, deep beneath the surface of forgotten worlds, did not change. They were eternal, untouched by the passage of time, and they knew that when the time came, they would rise. For now, though, they were content to wait in the cold, dark silence of their tombs. And the galaxy, oblivious to the power that lay hidden just beneath its surface, continued to turn. For millions of years, the Necron slept, hidden away beneath the surface of 1,000 forgotten worlds. Deep within their tombs, in chambers colder than the void itself, they lay in perfect stillness, their minds locked in stasis, their bodies untouched by the passage of time. But deep within the machinery of their tombs, something was beginning to change. It started slowly at first, a flicker of light in the darkened halls, a soft hum from the ancient generators that powered their stasis fields. These were tomb worlds, spread across the stars, each one the resting place of a Necron dynasty, and each one governed by the intricate mechanical workings of their vast, self-sustaining systems. The Necrons had built their tombs to last for millions of years, and they had done so well. But even the finest machines, left alone for too long, can begin to break down. On some tomb worlds, it was the passing of time itself that had taken its toll. Machinery that had once hummed with the perfect rhythm of Necron precision now sputtered and groaned under the weight of millennia. Power grids flickered, their once steady energy flows interrupted by age. And where in some places the tombs remained dormant, their systems still functional but teetering on the edge of failure. In others, the machinery began to awaken, slowly stirring the Necrons within. It was not an immediate awakening, no. The Necrons had learned patience beyond measure, and their tombs reflected that. The awakening was a slow and careful process, one that stretched across centuries. The tombs were built to revive their inhabitants only when the galaxy was once again ripe for conquest, when the younger races had risen and matured enough for the Necrons to claim their place as rulers once more. But something had changed in the galaxy, something that triggered the awakening sooner than expected. In the far reaches of the galaxy, a disturbance in the warp, unseen and unfelt by the Necrons themselves, who had no connection to that psychic realm, rippled through space. The galaxy was in turmoil. The younger races' once fledgling empires had grown strong. The Imperium of Man, vast and sprawling, now spanned the stars. Its fleets and armies engaged in endless wars to defend its territories. The Eldar, ancient and wise, though greatly diminished, still clung to the remnants of their once great empire. And beyond the known galaxy, darker forces gathered, horrors from the warp, creatures of the immaterium, and threats from beyond the stars themselves. It was this turmoil, this chaos, that finally stirred the Necrons from their long slumber. Slowly, across 1,000 tomb worlds, ancient mechanisms clicked into place, and the great process of awakening began. On one such world, a planet long forgotten by the galaxy, the first signs of movement came in the form of a soft rumble deep beneath the Earth. The planet itself had been silent for millennia, its surface covered in the dust of dead eons. But beneath the ground, in the hidden depths of its tombs, the Necron systems were coming to life. Vast underground chambers, each one holding an army of silent metallic warriors, began to hum with energy. The air, which had been still for so long, now stirred as the generators powered up, flooding the stasis fields with the energy needed to revive their occupants. Slowly, ever so slowly, the first of the Necron warriors stirred. Their cold metal bodies, untouched by time, began to move. At first it was a simple twitch, a flicker of movement in the fingers of a Necron warrior, its glowing green eyes flaring to life. Then another and another, until the entire chamber was filled with the soft sound of metal scraping against metal as the Necron legions awoke. These were the lower ranks of the Necron armies, the warriors who had once served in the front lines of the war in heaven. They were silent, obedient, their minds dulled by the long passage of time and the process of biotransference that had stripped them of their souls. But their bodies were strong, and as they stood, their glowing eyes focused on the tasks they had been programmed to fulfill. Above them, in chambers more elaborate and grand, the overlords and cryptex began to stir as well. These were the leaders of the Necron dynasties, beings of greater intelligence and power, who retained more of their individuality and cunning than the mindless warriors beneath them. Among them were the overlords, rulers of their tomb worlds, each one awakening with the knowledge that their time had come again. The galaxy was changing, and they would soon rise to reclaim it. But all was not well in every tomb world. While some systems awoke as planned, others had suffered during the long passage of time. On certain worlds, entire sections of the tomb complexes had collapsed, leaving vast chambers buried beneath rock and debris. In others, the stasis fields had malfunctioned, causing the Necron warriors within to decay, their bodies no longer the perfect shining metal of their kind. These tomb worlds awoke to chaos, their once proud legions reduced to mindless drones, broken and malfunctioning. For the Necron overlords, these malfunctions were more than a mere inconvenience. They were a challenge to their power. Each dynasty had its own goals, its own vision of the future, and the awakening of the tomb worlds brought not only the promise of conquest, but also the threat of internal strife. With the galaxy now filled with new empires, the Necrons would need to rebuild, to reorganize their shattered dynasties and prepare for war once more. But first, they had to restore order to their own ranks. And so, across the galaxy, the Necrons stirred. The tomb worlds awoke, some in perfect silence, others in chaos. As the ancient legions prepared for the long-awaited rise, the galaxy, still unaware of the ancient threat that had lain beneath its surface for so long, carried on with its wars and its struggles, oblivious to the fact that the Necrons, once the greatest power in the stars, were awakening once again. It was a slow awakening, careful and deliberate. As the Necron dynasties began to rise from the ashes of their own history, their time had come again, and though the galaxy did not yet know it, the Necrons would soon reclaim what was once theirs. Across the silent expanses of the galaxy, long-dormant tomb worlds stirred to life once more. Slowly, the ancient machinery of the Necrons, having waited patiently through the eons, began to hum and flicker. The Great Sleep was ending, and the Necron dynasties, those once mighty rulers of the stars, were awakening from their deep slumber. But this was no grand and unified return, no seamless revival of a long-lost empire. For while the Necrons were eternal, their empire was not. The dynasties, fractured by time and weakened by the ravages of the war in heaven, emerged not as one, but as many, each with its own ambitions, its own designs on the galaxy that had changed so much in their absence. Among the dynasties, the Sautek rose quickly to prominence. At its head stood Imhotep the Stormlord, a figure of immense strategic brilliance and unyielding determination. Imhotep had been a warlord in life, and in death he had lost none of his cunning. His dynasty, the Sautek, was the most aggressive and expansionist of the Necron dynasties, and under Imhotep's command, it sought to rebuild the Necron Empire through sheer force of arms. Imhotep was a tactician without peer, his mind as sharp as it had ever been, and he viewed the galaxy as a battlefield ripe for conquest. To Imhotep, the younger races that now inhabited the stars were little more than an inconvenience. Upstart civilizations that had taken root in the ruins of a galaxy that rightfully belonged to the Necrons. He held them in contempt. These short-lived creatures of flesh and bone, and he saw their empires as fragile things, easily shattered by the cold. Calculated might of the Necron legions, with his armies of gleaming warriors, his vast flotillas of ships, and his mastery of strategy, Imhotep set about the task of reclaiming the stars. But Imhotep was not the only Necron overlord with ambitions of power. Far across the galaxy, in the depths of their own tomb worlds, other dynasties were awakening, each with its own agenda, its own vision for the future of the Necron race. The Nihilach dynasty, ruled by the proud and arrogant overlord Faerun Khazad, was one such rival. The Nihilach considered themselves the true heirs of Necron grandeur, devoted to the preservation of their ancient heritage. While the Sautek sought conquest, the Nihilach believed in restoring the glory of the past through tradition and meticulous adherence to the old ways. Khazad, viewed Imhotep's brutal and direct approach with disdain. To him, the Stormlord's relentless drive for war lacked the dignity and refinement that a Necron ruler should embody. The Nihilak believed that the Necron race should rise again as it had once been, with all the pomp and ceremony of its golden age. In their tomb worlds, the Nihilak preserved the ancient relics of their empire, maintaining their stasis vaults and archives with religious fervor. Their armies, though smaller than those of the Sautek, were equipped with the finest Necron technology, each warrior gleaming with the perfection of their heritage. Between the Sautek and the Nihilak, tension simmered. Though war between them had not yet broken out, the galaxy was vast, and there was room enough for both dynasties to pursue their ambitions, for now. But beneath the surface, the Necron overlords knew that sooner or later their paths would collide. Both Imhotep and Khazad considered themselves the rightful leaders of the Necron race, and neither was willing to bow to the other. Yet looming over all the dynasties, like a shadow cast by a long-forgotten star, was Sharek, the Silent King. Long ago, it had been Sharek who had led the Necrontyr into the pact with the Satan, and it was Sharek who had guided the Necron race into the Great Sleep. Burdened by the weight of his decisions and the cost of the biotransference, Sharek had exiled himself from the Necron race after the war in heaven, wandering the void between galaxies, consumed by guilt and regret. But now Sharek had returned. The Silent King, as he was called, had watched from the shadows as his people awoke from their long slumber. He had seen the fractured state of the dynasties, the rivalries that had sprung up between them, and he knew that the Necron race was at a crossroads. Sharek was no fool. He understood that the galaxy had changed in ways that even he could not have foreseen. The younger races, for all their frailty, had built empires that spanned the stars. And though the Necrons were more powerful than any of them, the Necron race was no longer united as it once had been. Sharek's return was not without purpose. He had come back to the Necron race not to conquer, but to reunite. The Silent King sought to restore the Necrons to their former glory, to gather the fractured dynasties under his banner, and forge a single unified empire that could once again dominate the stars. But this was no easy task. Sharek's authority, once absolute, was now questioned by the overlords who had awakened in his absence. Imhotep, in particular, viewed the Silent King's return with suspicion. The Stormlord, with all his ambitions, was not eager to bend the knee to any ruler, even one as legendary as Sharek. To Sharek, the galaxy was a dangerous place, full of threats that could not be ignored. The younger races were not merely nuisances, they were a destabilizing force, creatures whose chaotic nature threatened the stability of the universe itself. Sharek believed that the Necrons, as the oldest and most advanced race, had a duty to bring order to the galaxy, to subjugate or destroy the younger races before their reckless expansion plunged the universe into ruin. For the Silent King, the Necrons' ultimate goal was simple: to reclaim the galaxy, not just as a place of power, but as a place of stability, a bastion against the chaos that now threatened to consume the universe. And so, as the Necrons awoke, the stage was set for a new era of conflict. The fractured dynasties, with their rival overlords and their ancient technologies, began to spread across the stars. They encountered the younger races, the humans, the Eldar, the Orcs, and the battles that followed were nothing like the galaxy had ever seen before. The awakening, encounters and conflict. The emergence of the Necron tomb worlds often came as a shock to the galaxy. A planet that had been deemed dead or dormant for millennia would suddenly erupt with life, not the organic life of the younger races, but the cold, relentless existence of living metal. For the Imperium of Man, the Necrons were just another Xeno threat, one more terrifying enemy to be fought and defeated in the Emperor's name. They saw the Necrons' gleaming metallic forms and their strange, advanced weapons, but they could not grasp the true age or the power of these beings. To the Imperial Guard, the Necrons were just a tough foe that kept standing up after being shot. a terrifying lesson in their resurrection protocols. When a Necron warrior was destroyed, its necrodermis body would often dissolve into green light and then teleport away, only to reappear later, fully repaired, on the battlefield. This act, this seemingly impossible defiance of death, drove many human soldiers mad. They were fighting an enemy that could not be killed, only momentarily delayed. The Eldar, however, understood the danger immediately. They remembered the ancient tales of the war in heaven, the terrifying power of the Necron legions, and the devastating influence of the Satan. The Eldar knew that the Necrons' return meant the end of all things, not because the Necrons were evil, but because they were the embodiment of inevitability. Their cold, logical pursuit of their ancient empire meant that every other race was simply an obstacle to be removed. The Eldar had to use every ounce of their cunning, every shard of their psychic power to fight this ancient foe. They sought to manipulate the Necrons, to turn the fractured dynasties against one another, knowing that a unified Necron empire was a threat that even they could not stand against. Structure and hierarchy of the Necrons. To understand the Necron threat, one must look deep into the structure of their society. It is a hierarchy of metal, a vast pyramid of cold logic where emotion has been long forgotten. At the very top of each awakening, Tombworld is the Pharaon, the supreme ruler of the entire dynasty. Below him are the overlords, the warlords and governors who execute the Pharaon's will. Overlords are often ancient, proud, and fiercely competitive, each commanding vast armies and resources. The overlords rely heavily on their personal guard, the Lich Guard and the Praetorians. Lich Guard are the silent, metallic bodyguards, armed with massive shields and energy scythes, sworn to protect their master until final destruction. They are the epitome of loyalty, their dedication programmed into their necrodermis shell. The Praetorians, on the other hand, are the keepers of the dynasty's honor, acting as observers and enforcers of the ancient codes, often traversing the stars to ensure their overlord's will is carried out. Beneath the ruling classes are the cryptechs. These are not mere soldiers or administrators, but the technological masters of the Necron race. The cryptechs are the scientists, the engineers, and the sorcerers of the Necrons, wielding power that defies the laws of physics. They manipulate energy, harness the very fabric of space and time, and are the ones responsible for maintaining the life support and stasis systems of the tomb worlds. The cryptechs, with their arcane knowledge of physics, are perhaps the most dangerous non-ruling class in the Necron hierarchy. And at the very bottom, forming the backbone of the entire army, are the Necron warriors, the simplest, most numerous, and most expendable of their kind. These warriors are the silent, inexorable tide that washes over the battlefield. Their minds are the most damaged by the biotransference, leaving them little more than automatons, metal shells following the basic commands of their overlords. Their only purpose is to march, shoot, and resurrect. The Cryptech Arcana. The Cryptechs are truly masters of the impossible. Their technology is so advanced, it appears as magic to the younger races. They specialize in different branches of science, each more terrifying than the last. There are the Chronomancers, who manipulate the flow of time, creating bubbles of slow motion around their enemies or accelerating their own movements. Then there are the Technomancers, who specialize in repairing and improving the Necron armies, ensuring that the resurrection protocols work perfectly, and that every piece of machinery is operating at peak efficiency. They are the mechanical heart of the Necron war machine. Perhaps the most destructive are the Plasmancers and the Psychomancers. Plasmancers wield energy in its purest form, manifesting devastating bolts of raw power. Psychomancers, though rare, are perhaps the most insidious, specializing in the emotional and mental manipulation of their enemies. They attack the sanity of the living, using dark psychological forces to drive foes to madness. All cryptechs, however, are united by one thing: their complete and utter dedication to the science and technology of the Necrons. They care nothing for the petty squabbles of the overlords, only for the purity and perfection of their work. They are the ultimate arbiters of Necron technology, the ones who truly hold the secrets of their immortality. Resurrection protocols, the enduring enigma. The true horror of the Necron legions lies in their resurrection protocols. This is the key to their immortality, the single technology that makes them so uniquely terrifying. Unlike the younger races, the Necrons do not have to truly kill their enemies. They only have to outlast them. When a Necron body is damaged beyond immediate repair, the necrodermis instantly activates a micro-teleportation system. The damaged body is phased out of the battlefield and teleported back to the safety of the Tomb World's repair bays. There, the cryptechs and the maintenance systems of the Tomb World work to rapidly repair the metal shell. Once the damage is mended, the Necron is immediately teleported back to the fight, often appearing right where it was destroyed, ready to continue its inexorable march. This means that a Necron army that is devastated in one battle might return in full force just hours later, utterly negating the enemy's victory. The resurrection protocols are the ultimate expression of the Necron's cold logic. Death is merely a temporary logistical failure to be corrected and returned to the field. It is a nightmare for any army facing them, a terrifying truth that you cannot truly win against the Necrons. You can only fight until they decide they have won. The Necron arsenal. The Necrons are armed with technology that is impossibly advanced, even for the standards of the 41st millennium. Their primary weapon is the Gauss Flare, a standard rifle carried by every Necron warrior. The Gauss Flare does not fire bullets or plasma. It fires a beam that strips its target down to the molecular level. It literally peels away the layers of a body, removing atoms one by one until nothing is left but dust. There is no armor that can completely stop a Gauss weapon. It simply removes the material, layer by layer, until it hits flesh. The more specialized death marks carry the Synaptic Disintegrator, a weapon designed for assassinating high-value targets. This gun can lock onto a target's vital signs, ignoring all cover, and fire a concentrated energy blast directly to the target's nervous system. They are the silent assassins of the Necron race, striking from nowhere to eliminate the enemy's commanders. For their heavy firepower, the Necrons rely on Tesla cannons. Unlike the Gauss weapons, the Tesla cannon fires a chain of supercharged lightning. When one target is hit, the lightning immediately arcs out to others nearby, often chaining across entire formations of enemy troops. It is a spectacular and terrifying display of raw energy. And finally, the great war engines of the Necrons, the monoliths. These vast pyramidal structures are the mobile fortresses and transport systems of the Necron legions. Armed with massive particle whips, they glide silently across the battlefield, projecting an aura of dread and invulnerability. The monoliths are equipped with a Gate of Eternity, a dimensional portal that can bring in fresh Necron reinforcements from the Tomb World, ensuring that the resurrection protocols are never truly defeated. The Necron arsenal is a perfect reflection of their nature. Precise, devastating, and entirely without mercy. Mobility and the dolmen. Gates, the Necrons possess a unique form of interstellar travel that separates them from almost every other race in the galaxy, the dolmen gates. While the Imperium of Man and the Eldar rely on the chaotic and dangerous warp to travel across the vast distances between stars, the Necrons, who fear and distrust the warp due to their history with the Citan and the Old Ones, use their own stable, localized network of portals. The dolmen gates are essentially localized warp gates, utilizing the Necron's mastery of dimensional science to create fixed, stable tunnels through space. This allows Necron fleets and armies to move with unparalleled speed and reliability, completely bypassing the dangers and unpredictability of the warp. They can bring vast armies to bear on an enemy planet in a matter of moments, arriving fully operational and without the psychic fatigue that plagues their rivals. This mastery of spatial travel gives the Necrons a strategic advantage that few can counter. They can strike anywhere, anytime, and then retreat just as quickly, leaving their enemies reeling and confused. The Silent King's return. as the fragmented dynasties began their wars of expansion. The return of Sharrak, the Silent King, became less of a rumor and more of a certainty. Sharrak had spent eons in the void between galaxies, traveling beyond the borders of known space, seeking a solution to the great curse the Necrons had placed upon themselves. During his exile, he had witnessed a threat far greater than any of the younger races, a cosmic plague, an unstoppable, all-consuming entity that devoured entire galaxies. The Tyranids, the Great Devourer, were a hive fleet from the galactic void, a truly alien force of unimaginable scale. It was the sight of this existential threat that finally convinced Sharrak to end his exile and return to the Necron race. He saw the disunity, the pettiness of the Overlord's squabbles, and he knew that the Necrons would not survive the Tyranids unless they were united once more. Sharrak's return was not greeted with universal joy. Overlords like Imhotep viewed him as a relic, a ruler whose time had passed and whose authority they were not ready to accept. Sharrak, however, did not return seeking worship, but seeking to rally his people against a common foe, a foe that threatened to make the Necrons' quest for a stable galaxy utterly meaningless. The stage was now set for the final conflict. The Necrons, fractured but eternal, facing a new era of war against the younger races, and the ultimate, terrifying threat from the void, the Necron grand strategy. The stage was now set for the final conflict. The Necrons, fractured but eternal, facing a new era of war against the younger races, and the ultimate, terrifying threat from the void. The strategy of the Necrons is not one of simple aggression, but of cold, calculated reclamation. They do not rush into battle, but advance with an inexorable patience that the mortal races cannot fathom. When a Necron dynasty decides to claim a world, it does so with a chilling efficiency. First, the Cryptex use their long-range sensors to analyze the planet, assessing the depth of its resources, the strength of its defenses, and the value of its artifacts. They are not interested in the surface cities or the fleeting lives of the inhabitants, only the ancient architecture of the world itself. Next comes the initial assault, often led by Tombblades and Destroyer cults. Tombblades are fast, anti-gravity skimmers that scout and engage, while the Destroyers are horrifying aberrations, Necrons, who have embraced the cold logic of destruction, seeing all life as a contamination that must be wiped out. These forces are brutal, intended to disrupt the enemy's defenses and draw out the main forces. The climax of the assault is the arrival of the monoliths and the main Necron warrior legions. The monoliths stabilize the battlefront, acting as teleportation hubs and mobile artillery, while the warriors simply walk forward, firing their Gauss flares with relentless precision. The Necrons do not need cover or morale. They only need marching orders and sufficient power for their resurrection protocols. When the conquest is complete, the Necrons begin the long, silent process of terraforming. They strip the planet of any messy biological life, using advanced technology to restore the world to a state of geometric and technological perfection, a shining monument to the return of their empire. The Destroyer cults, a glimpse of madness among the Necrons. There is a horrifying faction known as the Destroyer cults. These are Necrons who have succumbed to a unique form of technological madness. The loss of their organic life and the trauma of the biotransference was too great for their minds to endure, leaving them obsessed with a single driving purpose: the complete eradication of all life. They have mutilated their own metallic bodies, replacing their legs with anti-gravity sleds or mounting massive weapons directly onto their chassis. Their minds are utterly given over to the code of destruction. The Overlords tolerate the Destroyers, often utilizing them as shock troops for their sheer devastating power, but they view them with cold detachment. The Destroyers are a painful reminder of what they have lost, a cautionary tale of the price of immortality. Lords of destruction, such as the Skorpekh Lord, lead these cults, embodying pure cold aggression and wielding massive, scything limbs. The Canoptek constructs silent servitors. Not all Necrons are warriors or overlords. Many are the tireless, mindless drones known as Canoptek constructs, the maintenance crew of the tomb worlds. These are the silent servitors, built to maintain and guard the tombs during the long years of the Great Sleep. The most numerous are the scarabs, tiny, metallic insects that swarm in huge numbers. They are the maintenance workers, perpetually repairing the necrodermis of fallen warriors and stripping enemy vehicles down to the atomic level. They are often dismissed as mere pests until a swarm of them consumes an entire tank in moments. The wraiths are the silent hunters and guards, fast, phasing constructs that can move through walls and tear their enemies apart with razor-sharp claws. They are the perfect sentries, built to eliminate intruders with chilling efficiency. Finally, the spiders are the massive, crab-like factories of the tomb worlds. These constructs are responsible for building and maintaining the scarabs, acting as mobile repair bays and war machines that anchor the Necron defenses. The Canoptek constructs are the embodiment of Necron resilience, the self-repairing, self-maintaining machine that ensures the Necron Empire endures. The Citan shards, shackled gods. While the Necrons shattered their former masters, the Citan, they could not fully destroy them. Instead, they broke their immense forms into millions of fragments, known as Citan shards. These shards are imprisoned within Tesseract vaults, or the bodies of powerful Necron lords, forced to serve the dynasties that once obeyed them. A single Citan shard, though merely a fraction of its former self, still possesses godlike powers, the ability to manipulate energy, matter, and the fundamental laws of physics. They are wielded as terrifying weapons of war, capable of altering gravity, conjuring bolts of pure energy, or twisting time itself. However, controlling the Citan shards is a constant, perilous task. They remain beings of immense arrogance and hunger, always seeking to break free and consume the life force of the galaxy. The cryptechs and overlords must constantly use complex containment fields to keep the shards subdued, a testament to the immense power that even a fragment of a star god possesses. The future of the Necron Empire. As the Necrons continue their slow, inexorable rise, the galaxy faces a threat unlike any other. The young races, for all their passion and fury, are fighting an enemy that is not driven by emotion, but by cold, perfect logic, the ultimate aim of the Necrons, particularly under the returning influence of Sharek, the Silent King, is to undo the damage done by the biotransference. Sharek does not want to rule over a kingdom of hollow metallic slaves. He wants to restore the Necrons to their former organic bodies, free of the Citan's curse. But to do this, he must first defeat the Tyranids, the ultimate biological threat, and secure the galaxy from the chaos of the warp, which is now more violent and destabilized than ever before. The Necron awakening is not merely an invasion, it is a cosmic cleanup, a vast, eternal war machine seeking to restore order to a chaotic universe, believing that only through their cold, immortal logic can the galaxy survive. The Great Sleep has ended, and the Necrons have awakened. The stars that the younger races thought were theirs now face an ancient, terrible claimant. The future of the 41st millennium will be defined by whether the fragmented Necron dynasties can unite, or whether their internal rivalries and the onslaught of the Tyranids will shatter their dreams of eternal empire forever. The Necrons are here, and they have all the time in the world.